Every single time Taylor Sheridan drops a new show into the Yellowstone universe, people say the same thing. They say it can never be as good as the last one. They said that about 1883. They said it about 1923, and now with 1944 on the way. They are saying it again, but this time, something feels different. This time, the story is not just about how the Dutton family built their empire. This time, it is about the moment that almost destroyed it forever. The year was 1944. The world was at war, and back home in Montana, the Dutton Ranch was fighting a battle that nobody ever wrote down in the history books. A battle so ugly, so raw, and so full of betrayal that the family buried it. They erased it. They pretended it never happened. But secrets like that do not stay buried. Not in Montana. Not in the Dutton family. And not in a Taylor Sheridan show. So before the first episode ever airs, let's talk about why 1944 is not just another spin-off. It is the one that changes everything you thought you knew about this family. Asterisk to really understand why 1944 hits different. You have to step back and look at the big picture of this entire universe that Taylor Sheridan has been building for years. Now, think of it like a family photo album. Each show is a different chapter in that album. And when you lay them all out in order, you start to see that there is one chapter that was always missing. One chapter that the family never talked about. It starts with 1883. That show took us all the way back to the very beginning. It showed us how the Dutton family made that brutal, heartbreaking journey from Texas all the way up to Montana. People died, families were torn apart. And by the end of it, the land was claimed and the Dutton story had officially begun. That show was raw and emotional, and it made a lot of people cry. It set the foundation. Then came 1923. That show jumped forward in time and showed us the Dutton family holding onto that same land during one of the hardest periods in American history. The Great Depression was crushing people. Prohibition had turned neighbor against neighbor. And the land itself was under constant threat from people in suits who wanted to take it through paperwork and politics instead of gunfights. 1923 showed us that the Duttons were tough enough to survive all of that, but it also showed us that surviving always came with a price. And then there is the present-day Yellowstone series, the one that started it all. The one with Kevin Costner as John Dutton, standing on that porch, protecting that ranch like it is the only thing worth living for in this world. By the time we meet John Dutton, the ranch is already a legend. The family name carries weight. The land has been in the family for generations. But here is the thing that always sat in the back of your mind if you were paying attention. How did they get from 1923 to the present day without the whole thing falling apart? What happened in between? What are the years that nobody talks about? That is exactly where 1944 comes in. It lands right in the middle of that gap, right in the most dramatic, most painful, most complicated era that any American family could have lived through. The entire world was at war. Young men from every town in America were being shipped overseas. Farms and ranches were running on half the people they needed. The government had its hand in everything. And back home, the people who stayed behind had to figure out how to hold everything together with whatever they had left. For the Dutton family, that meant one thing: the ranch had to survive, no matter what it cost, no matter who got hurt, no matter what had to be buried when it was all over. And that is the story that 1944 is going to tell. Asterisk picture a long dirt road. At one end of that road, you have a covered wagon rolling through the wilderness in 1883. At the other end of that same road, you have John Dutton standing on his porch in the present day, rifle in hand, staring down anyone who dares come near his land. That road between those two moments is the entire Yellowstone universe. And for years, Taylor Sheridan has been filling in that road, piece by piece, show by show, year by year. But there was always one stretch of that road that nobody drove down. One stretch that was dark and quiet and felt like something had happened there that people just did not want to talk about. That stretch is 1944. Now to understand why that particular year matters so much, you have to think about what the Dutton family had already been through before 1944 even arrived. In 1883, they were just survivors. They were a family with nothing but a wagon, a dream, and the kind of stubbornness that only comes from people who have already lost everything once. They made it to Montana by sheer will. People they loved died on that journey, but they planted their flag in that land and they said, "This is ours." That moment was the birth of everything. Then, by 1923, the family had grown, the ranch had grown, but the threats had grown too. It was no longer just about survival in the wilderness. It was about survival in a world that was getting more complicated every single day. Banks, lawyers, politicians, people with money who had figured out that a pen and a piece of paper could take your land just as easily as a gun. The Duttons fought back against all of that, and they came out on the other side still standing, still holding that land, still refusing to let go. But here is what nobody ever really sat down and thought about. Between 1923 and the present day, there is roughly 100 years of Dutton history that we never saw. 100 years of seasons changing on that ranch. 100 years of calves being born and men dying and decisions being made around kitchen tables late at night. And right in the middle of all of that, sitting at the absolute center of that 100-year gap, is 1944, the year the whole world cracked open. The year America sent its sons to die in foreign fields. The year that back home, well, everyone was distracted by the war. Some of the ugliest land grabs and power plays in Western history were quietly happening, and the Duttons were right in the middle of it. What makes 1944 different from every other chapter in this story is the pressure. In 1883, the enemy was nature. In 1923, the enemy was the economy. But in 1944, the Duttons are being squeezed from every direction at the same time. There is a war taking the men away. There is a government that has decided it knows better than any rancher what that land should be used for. There is a neighboring family that has been waiting 20 years for a moment of weakness. And there is a secret inside the Dutton family itself, something that happened in that year, something that was so damaging that the family made a decision to erase it completely. To act like it never occurred, to cut a person out of their own history as if they never existed at all. That is the gap in the road. That is the stretch nobody drove down. And 1944 is finally going to take us there. There is a certain kind of story that does not get told out loud. It does not get written down in books or passed around at dinner tables. It lives in the silence between people who know the truth but have agreed, without ever saying a word, to never speak of it again. Every family has at least one story like that, one chapter they tore out, one name they stopped saying, one decision that was made in a dark moment that changed the shape of everything that came after. For the Dutton family, that story happened in 1944, and the reason it has never been told until now is because the people who lived through it made absolutely sure it would not be. The surface of this story looks like a ranch trying to survive a war, and that part is real. The men are gone. The ones who are old enough to fight have been shipped overseas, thousands of miles away from Montana, carrying rifles instead of fence posts, sleeping in mud instead of on the land their grandfather died to claim, back home. The ranch is running on fumes. There are not enough hands to work it. There is not enough money to maintain it. And there are people circling that land like wolves who have been waiting for exactly this kind of moment. A moment where the Duttons are stretched so thin that one hard push might finally be enough to knock them down for good. But the surface is never where the real story lives in a Taylor Sheridan show. The real story is underneath, and underneath 1944, there is something far more disturbing than a wrench under pressure. There is a woman. A Dutton woman who was never supposed to be in charge of anything, who was raised to stand beside the men. In this family, not in front of them, but with the men gone and the wolves at the door, she steps into the middle of that ranch and she becomes something that nobody in her family saw coming. She becomes the most dangerous Dutton who ever lived, not because she is violent, though she can be, but because she is smart in a way that cuts deeper than any knife. She sees the game being played against her family and she decides to play it back, except she plays it without any of the rules that the men around her assumed she would follow. She makes deals that would make your stomach turn. She shakes hands with people that no Dutton should ever be in the same room with. She sacrifices things and people that she loves because she understands something that nobody else around her is willing to admit. That sentiment is a luxury, that loyalty has a price, and that the only way to protect something as big and as fragile as the Dutton Ranch in a moment as dangerous as 1944 is to be willing to do the thing that everyone else is too after to even think about. She does those things. And she wins. She saves the ranch. She holds the land. But what she does to get there is so far outside the line of what the Dutton family stands for. At least the version of that family that they have always shown the world. That when it is all over, they make a decision. They decide that she never existed. They take her name out of the story. They fold her chapter up and they put it somewhere no one will ever look. And for 80 years, it works. That is the wound at the center of 1944. Not the war, not the land grab, not the politics or the poverty or the brutal Montana winters. The wound is a woman who gave everything to save a family that then turned around and erased her for it. And the reason that wound matters is because wounds do not heal just because you stop looking at them. They fester, they spread. And somewhere down that long dirt road, in the present day, on that ranch that John Dutton is standing on with his rifle and his pride, there is a crack in the foundation that nobody has been able to explain, a weakness that keeps showing up, no matter how many times they patch over it. And that crack has a name, it has a face, and in 1944, we are finally going to meet her. Asterisk here is the thing about the Yellowstone universe that Taylor Sheridan understood before anyone else did. The land was never really the point. The land is just the stage, what the story has always been about, from that very first covered wagon rolling through the wilderness in 1883, all the way to John Dutton standing on that porch in the present day, is what a family is willing to become in order to hold onto the thing they love most. Every spin-off has peeled back another layer of that question. Every chapter has shown us a different version of the Dutton family facing a different kind of monster. But none of them, not 1883, not 1923, none of them have ever gone to the place that 1944 is going to go, because 1883 gave us tragedy. It gave us loss and grief and a family that survived by holding onto each other through the worst kind of pain. And people loved it because it felt real and it felt earned and it broke your heart in all the right ways. Then 1923 gave us grit. It gave us a family that had already been through the fire and came out harder on the other side. A family that had learned that the world does not care about your grief and it does not reward your loyalty, and the only thing that keeps the wolves from the door is being tougher than the wolves. And people loved that too because it showed a different kind of strength. But 1944 is not going to give you tragedy. It is not going to give you grit. What 1944 is going to give you is something that the other shows only ever hinted at. It is going to give you the moment where the Dutton family crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. The moment where they stopped being the heroes of their own story and became something more complicated and more human and more difficult to look at than any version of this family we have ever seen before. It is going to show you the decision that built the foundation of everything John Dutton stands on. And when you see what that decision was, when you understand what it cost and who paid the price for it, you are never going to look at that ranch the same way again. You are never going to watch John Dutton stand on that porch the same way again, because you will know what is buried underneath it. That is why 1944 is not just another spin-off. It is the missing piece. It is the chapter that makes the whole book finally make sense. It is the answer to the question that has been sitting quietly in the back of your mind since the very first episode of Yellowstone aired, and you found yourself wondering how a family gets to be that way, how they get to be that hard, that loyal, that willing to destroy anything and anyone that comes between them and that land. Now you are going to find out. And the answer is not going to be clean. It is not going to be comfortable. But it is going to be the most compelling television that this universe has ever produced. So the only question left is this. Do you think any spin-off can ever top 1883? Or is 1944 about to change your answer to that question forever? Drop your thoughts in the comments right now because that conversation is one that needs to happen. And if you are not subscribed yet, this is the moment to do it. Because when the casting news drops, when the trailer hits, when this show finally arrives, you are going to want to be here for every single second of it.